One of the critical factors in greenhouse production is being able to maintain the temperatures in the greenhouse, especially during the late spring and summer months. This really emphasizes the need for making a good decision about the ventilation system that you use, because the plant health as well as worker comfort has to do with how good a choice you make. Really, all ventilation systems can be broken down into two broad groups: mechanical ventilation and natural ventilation. Natural ventilation uses a combination typically of roof vents and wall vents to work with the forces of wind and air to ventilate the greenhouse passively. Mechanical ventilation uses a combination of either fan and inlet vents or fan and pad to mechanically ventilate the greenhouse. Today we're going to talk about all three of these systems and the advantages and disadvantages of each, so that you can make a good decision as you choose a ventilation system for your greenhouse. Greenhouse ventilation involves removing air from the inside of the greenhouse and replacing it with outside air. Natural ventilation does this by taking advantage of the forces of wind and temperature in such a way as to create a natural air exchange process. This can involve using sidewall and in-wall vents alone, and in some situations this approach can provide adequate ventilation. However, the best performing systems include a combination of roof and wall vents that have been sized according to sound ventilation principles. With this type system, wind passing over the backside of the roof vents creates a vacuum that draws hot air out of the roof of the greenhouse. This in turn creates a slight vacuum that draws cooler outside air in through the wall vents, lowering the temperature of the greenhouse. This effect is aided by the natural tendency of hot air to rise. As the cooler outside air comes into the greenhouse, it's being heated by solar radiation. As the air temperature rises, it pushes towards the top of the house and eventually exits the roof vents, creating a sort of chimney effect to the system. The movement of this hotter air out of the roof vent creates an additional vacuum, causing more outside air to enter through the wall vents. This system can be a very efficient and cost-effective way to ventilate a single greenhouse or a range of greenhouses if designed properly. Natural ventilation system has some real advantages to it, and I want to go over those with you just briefly. First, the natural ventilation is fairly inexpensive as far as an initial purchase price if you're just buying the simple manual system. Secondly, the operating costs are very low. Even if you opt for the more expensive automatic system, there's very little electricity used with these systems, so operating cost is very reasonable. And finally, there's sort of a fringe benefit of these systems in that it allows you to gain access to your product from the sidewalls and the end walls of the greenhouse, so operationally you have that advantage as well. But there are some disadvantages to the system. First of all, you give up a little control. These systems are not as precise in control as a mechanical system because they have to rely on the effects of wind and temperature, so that's always going to be an issue. Also, the manual systems are labor intensive. And so when you have a manual system, although it's inexpensive to purchase, it does require somebody to be on the farm to open and close all of the time. Also, the automatic systems can be very expensive. They can be as expensive as a mechanical system with a full fan and pad setup, so that's something you always have to keep in mind. And finally, if these systems are not installed correctly, you can actually cause your heating costs to go up. The vents have to be sealed well. If they're not, you'll lose air through infiltration. It will affect your heating costs. Mechanical ventilation involves using fans to exhaust the hot air out of the greenhouse while drawing in cooler outside air through an inlet vent, usually at the opposite end of the greenhouse. As the hot air is drawn out of the greenhouse by the fans, a slight vacuum is created that causes outside air to come into the greenhouse. This combination of exhausting hot air and bringing in cooler outside air can serve as an effective way to lower the greenhouse temperature. However, the best you can expect from this type of fan and vent ventilation system is to lower the inside temperature of the greenhouse during the day to close to the same level as the outside air temperature. If your goal is to lower the inside temperature of the greenhouse to a point below the outside temperature, then that's most commonly going to be done with evaporative cooling. With this type of mechanical ventilation, hot air is being exhausted out of the greenhouse with these fans, while at the same time air is being pulled from outside across the cool pads on the opposite end of either an end wall or a side wall. It's being cooled as it enters the greenhouse. As the air passes through the pads, the water is evaporated and the temperature of the air can be reduced by as much as 10 to 20 degrees below the outside temperature. The potential for cooling with this system is affected by the humidity of the air, but even in fairly humid parts of the country, there are a number of days each summer that significant cooling can be achieved. So as we've discussed, all of these systems have advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages for all mechanical ventilation systems include, first of all, precise control. You can actually control the greenhouse environment more precisely than you can with natural ventilation. Another issue is that you can avoid some of the drafts and potential plant damage along the outside edges of the vents with a natural ventilation system. And finally, these systems are actually less expensive to automate in most cases than a natural ventilation system. In addition, when we talk about evaporative cooling, there's one even more notable advantage, and that is that these systems allow you to lower the inside temperature of the greenhouse below what the outside temperature is. And this has the advantage in the long term of extending a growing season, either by allowing a grower to start the season earlier or by extending it towards the end of the season beyond what you normally could. There are some disadvantages of evaporative cooling, or all mechanical cooling for that matter, and that primarily relates to the monthly cost to run the systems. They all require electricity, so if you're in a remote area where you don't have electricity available, these systems are not for you. And not only do they require electricity, they require a lot of electricity in some cases. So the monthly operating cost for a mechanical system, because of the size of the fan motors, can be pretty extreme. In addition to that, evaporative cooling brings in a couple of other issues that might be considered disadvantages. Primarily the maintenance of the systems. These systems have to be maintained. The pads have to be cleaned, they have to be treated for algae, the water quality needs to be kept to a certain point, filters have to be replaced and cleaned. So maintenance really becomes a key issue with this system, and how well you maintain it, like so much of equipment that we deal with, it depends on how long the system lasts. And finally, these systems, these evaporative cooling systems, require a tight greenhouse. So if you have any gaps around doors, windows, or any place else in the greenhouse, those will have to be sealed up in order to ensure that the system works with the highest efficiency. So to wrap things up, we've talked about natural ventilation, mechanical ventilation with fans and vents, and mechanical ventilation with fans and pads. These are the three most common types of greenhouse ventilation systems, and each has its own advantages and disadvantages. However, if properly designed and installed, each type of system can work well in the proper setting. Finding the right ventilation system for your greenhouse is more about finding a system that's right for you and your situation than anything else. So do your homework, weigh your options, and choose the system that matches up best with your budget, your location, and your application.